So, I'll call the meeting to order. Housing Advisory Commission meeting, January 9th. Welcome to everyone, and let's have a roll call, please.
All right. Commissioner Lundholm,
Here.
Commissioner Carney, Commissioner Gaston.
Here.
Commissioner Honig let me know that he's running about 15-20 minutes late. Commissioner Brown.
Here.
Commissioner Geisreiter.
Here.
Commissioner Siles. And Commissioner Haynes.
Here.
Commissioner James.
Here.
And Commissioner Martin.
Yes. All right, thank you. Welcome, everyone, and a special welcome to our U.S. Commissioner, Tara. Is it Tara or Tara?
Tara.
Tara. Okay. Thank you, Tara Gasta. And could I just impose upon you to maybe tell us a little bit about your background? You were just appointed by Supervisor Leopold.
Sure. I've lived in the Pleasure Point neighborhood for 20 years. I, for 6 years, ran an Airbnb until a year ago, when one of my sons moved out and is living in the suite. And I've sold real estate in the past, and I've always been interested in housing, and especially affordable housing and concerns about taking care of the homeless population. So that's my background, pretty much, probably enough.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Glad you've joined us. Do we have any corrections to the agenda?
I do just have a handout, and this is just something the commissioners have already seen before from last year. This is just for a reminder for everyone. I thought it might be a good time just to refresh everyone's memory. I did update the January meeting day since we pushed it out by 1 week to today. So I'll just hand those out, and I have some extra copies for members of the public. And that's just the annual, actually biannual work plan that was adopted last year. This is not the version that was signed by the then Chair Geisreiter, but it is the same other than the updated correction. Just wanted to pass that out.
Thank you very much. If there's nothing further on that, then I'll open the floor to oral communications. So this is for communications from the public regarding items not on today's agenda. Is there anyone from the public who'd like to address us on items that are not on today's agenda? Seeing none. Jane, we're just doing oral communications now for items not on the agenda. Did you want to speak to us about that? Okay, great. Well, then I'll close the oral communications and we'll move on to the consent agenda, which is the minutes from the November 7th meeting of our commission. Does anyone have any questions or comments about the minutes? If not, I would entertain a motion to approve those.
Move approval.
Okay.
Second.
All right.
Can I just ask you again, who was the mover? Second, thank you.
We had very
And the second? Thank you.
Very excited seconds to that. So we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed say no. Any abstentions? Okay, that carries unanimously. And now to our scheduled agenda, a status update on affordable housing policy proposals in progress, including the new permanent room housing combining zone, code modifications for rental housing in public facility zones, and farm worker housing.
So I'd like to introduce our Sustainability and Special Projects Manager. You may know of that division used to be Advanced Planning, so that's kind of the new name. And she will introduce her staff who are going to give you the presentation and tell you a little bit more about this item.
Great.
Great, thank you, Suzanne. I'm Stephanie Hansen. I think I've met most of you before at a prior meeting. Our group, formerly known as the policy group, is kind of working on many initiatives, and some of them overlap with our housing division folks. And as you probably know, between 2011 and 2014, our big mission was working on the Sustainable Santa Cruz County Plan, which provided many initiatives regarding housing, transportation, sustainable communities, and economics, and many initiatives came out of that work. And out of that also came a big work program on getting the general plan amended to be consistent and the county code. So it's a massive work program. We're still working on it, still trying to come up with all the amendments that are necessary, gearing up for an EIR. But in the meantime, in 2015, the board and the planning director kind of realized it was going to take a while before we could get it all up and running. So they called out a couple of really important housing initiatives, and your commission got involved with them in making some recommendations as to which of those initiatives could move forward separately. So some of them have moved forward already, we're happy to say, and some of them we are still working on, and so we thought it would be great to come and give you guys an update on where we are, considering that you were involved in the very beginning, and some of them are taking longer than we thought. So I'm going to pass it over to Daisy Allen. She and Annie Murphy are going to be updating you on some of the initiatives and where they are now. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Stephanie. So I'm Daisy Allen, and I'm a senior planner here. So the purpose of the presentation today is to give you an update on our affordable housing policy initiatives in progress in our department, and also provide detail and request feedback on two specific initiatives, one being the permanent room housing combining zone district, and the other one being multifamily housing in the public facilities zone. So as Stephanie kind of alluded to, just to give you a very brief overview of kind of the last year on this, in March, I believe, of last year, the board requested that Housing Advisory Commission develop a list of near-term housing policy initiatives that we could pursue separate from our larger sustainability update. And then in May, you met and came up with a list, and the board approved this list of projects in June. So at that time, staff started work on this list of projects. Then you've already seen kind of the first packet of amendments that we worked on. Suzanne Issei brought those to you in September, and that included the enhanced density bonus, inclusionary housing options, and our combining district procedures, changes to those things in our code. And the board actually approved those amendments in December. So the next step on those amendments is that they will be going to the Coastal Commission for final certification, and that's expected, I believe, in March. The Coastal Commission is currently reviewing the amendments to chapters 1301 and 1310. The amendments to chapters 1710 and 1712 are already in effect. Okay, and then so that brings us up to today. So today we're bringing you kind of our drafted policy ideas for permanent room housing and also multifamily in the public facilities district. And then we'll also touch on where we're at with farm worker housing, earlier in the process for that one. So the recommendation for you today would be to provide comments on these two initiatives that we're working on and receive public comments on these proposals. So launching into the permanent room housing combining zone district. So the permanent room housing initiative involves recognizing the conversion of former motels, hotels, and then also convalescent homes, rest homes, and retirement home properties to long-term multifamily residential use with the new zoning overlay district, what we call a combining zone district, that we are naming the permanent room housing combining zone district. So some buildings that were originally built for visitor accommodation or for rest homes, convalescent homes, et cetera, have become obsolete in that use. These properties can serve an important role in addressing our affordable housing crisis because converting older cabins or hotel rooms to housing actually it can be affordable by design just due to the small size of these units. And this actually is one of our programs in our housing element to do this combining zone district. So it's not a kind of a new idea. Let's see, yeah, some of the current permanent room housing opportunity properties are illegal uses on their site, but they've never been recognized for doing residential use before, but they've already converted to residential use in the past. So we would be legalizing that use with the combining zone district. Other situations are considered legal non-conforming right now, where we have recognized the residential use in the past, but this would be fully legalizing that use. And then the way the combining zone district works, you may be familiar with, but it's a set of property use and development standards that functions as an overlay on top of the underlying zone district. So this little graphic kind of illustrates that. Like, you would still have the underlying zone district use and development standards, and then we are adding on permanent room housing as an additional use and development standards on top of that for these properties. So an example would be if a property is zoned for visitor accommodation, if it's zoned VA, you would still be able to do a hotel use on that property, even if it has the combining zone district on it. But this would just allow it to have that additional housing use. And then just to clarify the scope, I've gotten some questions on this. So the purpose of the district is to recognize and legalize and make safe residential status of existing obsolete visitor accommodations and former rest home, convalescent homes, et cetera. We're not proposing to convert over active hotels, active retirement homes, et cetera, to housing. Those facilities are very important in the uses that they already provide. We won't be legalizing structures that are unpermitted. There's separate procedures for that in the county. And we wouldn't be resolving unrelated code issues on these properties. So there's three aspects of our policy work here. One is a general plan update. We have to update the general plan in terms of our residential and our commercial policies to allow higher residential density and allow a higher percentage of residential use on commercial properties. So we're modifying our general plan policies there to enable the creation of the zone district. And then the second portion of our policy work is actually creating the new zoning district. And there's use and development standards associated with that I'll go into in a minute. And then the third component is exciting. We're actually proposing to rezone 9 properties into the district concurrent with the creation of the district. So we've been working collaboratively with property owners that we've identified as having opportunity sites in the county, and we have worked with them to make sure that we are writing standards that are achievable and make sense, and we're actually planning to have units be part of this zoning district. Our goal is for the maximum number of properties to be able to take advantage of this rezoning opportunity. So in terms of the proposed code, I'm just going to go through the components of the code. So you're aware, the zone district would apply to, or the combining zone district would be available to residential, commercial, and special use zone districts. The applicants have to prove that their buildings were originally in use as motels, hotels, or rest homes, convalescent homes, etc. In terms of building code, we certainly aren't requiring these existing buildings to meet current building code standards, but we are requiring them to meet basic health and safety standards, and we'll be enforcing that through an on-site inspection using HUD's housing quality standards checklist for health and safety. And then any new remodels or additions, of course, would have to meet current code. And then we're not triggering ADA requirements through this because we're changing our occupancy from R1 or I down to R2. Okay, and then in terms of the development standards, we are allowing, he's a commissioner. Okay, so we're allowing folks to maintain the density that they have currently built on their properties, and we're allowing people to build additional permanent room housing units if that's allowable based on the underlying zoning density for their site. We're defining permanent room housing units as units that are 120 to 500 square feet. We're allowing larger units to be grandfathered in. And we're allowing one manager's unit per property, because a lot of these old hotel properties have manager's units existing on site. We're requiring individual or shared kitchens, individual or shared bathrooms, parking at 0.75 spaces per unit. We arrived at this number through research of what neighboring jurisdictions have done, and also what's achievable on these properties. And then we're encouraging bike parking and storage, but we're not requiring those things. We stopped short of including any additional development standards because all of these sites are quirky. They all have different configurations, and any additional standards would be kind of nice to have things, but these are all necessary things to have safe housing for folks on site. Okay, and then in terms of affordability, we are not requiring affordability, deed-restricted affordability or Section 8 or anything like that. Owners are welcome to participate in affordable housing programs, but the code is just recognizing the units as being affordable by design. Short-term rentals, has been an interesting discussion point. A lot of these properties, they would like to rent for short-term during the summer months, the tourism months, and then have the units available for long-term rental outside of the tourist season, and we are allowing that flexibility. And we also are allowing owners to have some short-term rentals and some long-term rentals on the same property. But any units that are considered permanent room housing units have to be used as long-term rentals for at least 9 months of the year. Okay, and then as I mentioned before, the properties will all still have to meet the underlying zone district standards. So for instance, there's standards for floor area, there's standards for setbacks, standards for building heights, all of those things related to the underlying zone district would still apply here. Okay, and then just to give you an idea of where these properties are located, so we have 9 properties that have 5 property owners representing 9 properties that are in the process of applying. A couple of them are in the Boulder Creek area. This one here, it's 2 properties next to each other, 14630 and 14650, 2 Bar Road.
Clausic's property?
Yeah, that's right.
How did I do it?
And also this one down here, which is 13320 Highway 9, kind of just on the northern edge of Boulder Creek, right across the bridge there. So these properties up here were former motel, and this property down here was a former vacation cabins. And then in the Felton area, we have a former motel, it used to be called the Wagon Wheel Motel, and actually downtown Felton. It's been residential for quite some time. And then we have the Toll House, which you might be familiar with. It's a historic property.
The Noon family.
Yeah, that's correct.
How did I know?
Yeah. So that was also a vacation rentals that has been converted to residential. And then the other 4 properties are all in Central County, District 2. So there's Adobe Hacienda at 2222 Santa Cruz Avenue, which you all may be familiar with. And then there's 165 East Street, which is around the corner from that property. Both of those were originally constructed as motels. They're both actually zoned residential right now, but they're non-conforming in terms of their density. So joining this zone district would allow them to become conforming with their density. There's also the Bayview Hotel, located in central Aptos. And then there's another property here, used to originally be called the Arabian Motel. It's adjacent to Sid's Smokehouse, right off the 1. And that's been residential for quite some time. So all of these represent 77 units. And I'd be happy to talk more about any of these. just to give you an idea of the types of properties we're looking at, there's kind of former motels that are kind of like long, thin buildings. There's also kind of vacation cabins kind of situations out in the woods. This is the property at 10110 Soquel Drive, adjacent to Sid's Barbecue. This is a portion of the Adobe Hacienda at 222 Santa Cruz Ave. So there's a lot of different situations existing out there, and it's kind of it was just provided to you to kind of get started thinking about all of those things. Okay, and now I'll turn it over to Annie to talk about the public facilities.
Daisy, do you want to take questions now on this part, or how do you want to manage questions?
You want to? Okay, yeah. Any questions?
Yeah, and I think that's a good idea, given
It's a
the
lot.
3 different topics we're going to be talking about. So I would take any commissioner questions on that, and I will hold public comment, though, until I think we've tackled all 3 topics, if that's okay.
Good. Jason, quick question. Have you gone so far on this that other properties are not welcome in what you're doing?
That we've like turned down properties that are.
Are you open to hearing about other properties that might qualify for this, or have you gone too far?
We are open to hearing about other properties that
Good.
might
Thank you.
qualify. However, we are going to planning commission with this on the 23rd. So they wouldn't be included, any new properties wouldn't be included in this bundle that we're taking to planning commission at this
I
time.
can ask a related but separate question. So your staff report says that we reached out to some folks and they said no to this program. What was the push? What was the reason for no?
Some of the folks so I held a community meeting in September. We did an initial outreach to everyone that we could identify through zoning and assessors' records and those kinds of things. Reached out to 14 properties that we identified. Some of those folks decided not to because they felt like, well, I'm not planning to make any changes on my property, I'm legal non-conforming, this won't really affect me in the near future. So I think some folks decided they didn't want to go through an extra administrative process at this time.
But kind of back to Kent's point, it is an overlay district. So if someone, these are the ones we identified today, but if someone wants to step forward in the future and they're in the overlay district, they could come apply. Right now, it's kind of a free process to get rezoned. In the future, it would be a process for them to come apply to get rezoned and pay fees associated with that, but they would
That's
still be in the
correct.
overlay district.
That's correct, yes. The district doesn't include specific properties. Specific properties have to apply to be added to the district. As a courtesy to property owners that were willing to go into this application process in a collaborative kind of situation with us as we develop the ordinance, we process their applications free of charge. Yep.
I'm not too clear about the geography of these the zoning districts. Is it building by building? Yes?
Yeah, so we're not identifying a specific geographic area that's included or excluded from the combining zone district. It's the combining zone district is available to any property in the county that meets the criteria for the district.
So maybe we should just clarify that we did some internal staff analysis using GIS and some of the internal county records to look for potential candidate properties, and that's how we came up with the 10 or so.
That's right.
And just anecdotal knowledge that we had of some of these properties that would be good candidates, we thought, for this program. So those were the ones we invited.
Right. And so the zoning is countywide.
Correct.
Yeah, potentially.
It's an overlay, which means that it can be used in it's not limited to a specific geographic area.
Right. Thank you.
I'm wondering how you came up with the .75 for parking. Given
Yeah.
where these are located, how would you expect people to get around without public transportation? If they don't have a car, so I just want to know if you looked at any of that.
Sure, yeah, so we definitely took into account the situations at the existing parcels. But I looked at about 10 or 12 other neighboring jurisdictions that have motel conversion ordinances and single room occupancy motel ordinances and other similar types of ordinances, and most of those ordinances have anywhere from 0 to 0.75 is kind of on the high end of the parking spaces per unit. Now, some of those ordinances are for former homeless folks, people that require supportive services.
Right.
So that's not part of this,
Right.
this process. So we thought it would be better to go more on the high end in terms of the parking that we provide. We also, I talked to the city of Santa Cruz. They have a very similar ordinance, and they started their ordinance at 0.5 parking spaces per unit, and then they had a lot of problems with people parking in the surrounding neighborhoods and creating an impact.
Yes.
And so because of that, they actually amended their ordinance later to be 0.75, and that has solved that problem for them.
Yeah, well, that was my concern. I mean, were these other jurisdictions rural like this, or were they like the city of Santa Cruz that has public transportation available to people?
It's a mix. I looked at like Monterey County, also, Sonoma County, other kind of comparable counties in the area. It's really kind of a big mix of the ordinances and the development standards that they have.
Daisy, maybe it would be helpful just to clarify, this is a minimum. So if properties have room, they are certainly
Right.
welcome and able to provide more than that. That's just the minimum.
That's true, yeah. The other thing I would say is that the properties that are up Highway 9,
Right.
they all have at least one space per unit on those properties. Where we're more constrained is in like the Sea Cliff area, like the 165 East Street property.
Right.
Here, that's the only property in this batch that they have an issue with parking. Actually, 165 East Street is requesting an exception to the parking requirement because they have no parking on site. Their building takes up almost the entire parcel.
So where will people park?
Well, people are already living there and parking on the street, so there's no change.
That's the main point, is that people
Yeah.
are already there doing what they're doing.
Okay.
Right.
It's not going to impact it.
Right, because on that, these parcels here in Sea Cliff, they're already way over the allowed floor area on those parcels anyway, so we wouldn't ever allow them to build more units. So there wouldn't ever be more parking demand created
Okay.
as a result of this ordinance.
Thank you.
Are any of these properties doing short-term rentals now?
Yes, let me think about that. I believe the Bayview Hotel is doing has done some short-term and some long-term mix. And also the Toll House property, they're requesting for 2 or 3, I can't remember, 2 or 3 of their units to remain as short-term exclusively, and then the rest to be the PRH units. The other ones, as far as I know, are requesting all PRH units.
That was my follow-up question was, if the goal here is to provide affordable units by design, why would we permit short-term rentals
Right.
if they're not already an established use of the site?
Right, well, that's an interesting
Do
question.
you want us to chime in on that?
Sure.
We had to, there's a lot of things to consider. One thing that we wanted to consider is not making the program so tightly defined that property owners wouldn't want to participate, because then we haven't added any new housing or legalized any new housing. So we had some outreach meetings, and Daisy's been doing a fantastic job working really one-on-one with each property owner. And hearing about their issues and the sort of uniqueness of each site. And so we're trying to kind of bring as many properties up to the standards of this program, which we think overall will have a net benefit, both in terms of health and safety, because we will be going and inspecting all of the units, that even if a few of the units in several of the properties are retained as short-term rental, still they're all safer, for one. And I think in most cases, it's the majority of the units, even in these 2 that are doing a mix or may choose to do the mix, the majority will be used as long-term rentals. So that's like on net, we feel like that's the favorable outcome, rather than making it so tight that those two properties would choose not to opt in. Because we have no lever to force them to opt in, really. They're mostly legal non-conforming. They were built before we had zoning and building codes to enforce. So we can't like do code enforcement and prevent them from just continuing in a status quo.
Was there any other questions for commissioners?
Is this likely to create any new units or like recognize units that are not in use today and create new spaces available for rentals, or actually, what could it also decrease any that are not conforming enough to get up to code? As far as the stock that we have currently.
Yeah, we're just recognizing what's there right now.
Some of these old hotels, motels are all derelict. We assume
Yeah,
they're being rented
we are
out.
doing the health and safety inspection. That's going to be required. The inspection checklist it's for, minimum requirements, but the inspector is going to be looking for hazards, electrical, plumbing, hot water, cold water, all of those basics. So if we do find that some of these units do not meet those requirements, we're going to require property owners to get building permits to fix those things.
But I understood the question is, do we have the potential here for more housing units?
There is potential for more housing units on
I mean,
a couple of the properties. Most of the
Not-
properties are
not-
too
Not these
constrained.
properties, any properties in the county. Do we have, there's possibility of more units
Of this type, are you
of
asking?
this type, yes. Of
If there
course.
are other old motels or rest homes of that nature that are interested in opting in later. So I guess maybe to clarify, it sounds like there may be some confusion around whether or not there would be new construction. Is that the question?
Well, if they have an old motel, can they rebuild it to a bigger old motel?
Most likely,
Add more units.
no.
Or my question would be,
This would be
related
the
would be, if you have an old motel and it's, the pressures to make it permanent housing, is that going to happen?
Well, that's what most of these sites.
Well, yeah, those are those sites. There are many other sites in the county.
They're underutilized or.
Yeah, so I reached out to all of the property owners with sites that are either zoned or general plan designated for visitor accommodation, or that have an assessor's use code related to hotel, motel, rest home, convalescent home, et cetera. And then we also added in some additional sites that our housing group was aware of, that were former motels or hotels that were converted. Now, there may be some additional sites that we don't know about because they're no longer zoned to be motels. Maybe they're zoned residential or commercial. Maybe they no longer have an assessor's use code that we can look up easily. So those folks may come to us and reach out to us in the future to join the district.
Yes,
But we did kind of the extent of what we could do in terms of our outreach.
of course, of
Yeah.
course. I can just imagine being a motel owner and not being competitive. It's getting harder and harder to run the thing, and decide.
That's
that-
true. There could be some, so what you're asking about sounds like is active motels that are struggling and might want to switch over to residential. And so I think those folks would have an opportunity to apply, but we would really need to look at that.
Sure.
And we do not allow that in the coastal zone. We did meet with the Coastal Commission. It would require a much larger general plan amendment to switch from a property from visitor accommodation to residential.
Yeah, there's a question.
Well, actually, what I'd like to do is have you do the second part of your presentation, maybe put the next two topics together, since farm worker I think is going to be fairly short. And then I'll just ask members of the public to hold on to your questions until we get through that next set of information, and then I'll open it up to the public.
Will we get extra time because we have to comment on a broad range of things?
Well, I'm going to allow 3 minutes per person because we have enough to get through today and have to be done by 2:30.
I just want to say I don't think that's fair to the public.
Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, Commissioners. Annie Murphy. So currently, the Public Facilities Zone District in the county provides land for public and quasi-public uses such as fire and police stations, schools, hospitals, and community centers. Many sites within the zone district have underutilized land available, and recognizing that affordable housing serves a public purpose and that attainable housing for school employees is currently in short supply, but is also essential for successful operation of local schools, these housing types are recognized as providing a public benefit and therefore as appropriate uses in the PF zone district.
Yeah.
There we go. Current regulations allow housing on public facility sites at low densities and require such housing to be secondary to another PF use on the parcel. These limits can discourage the development of affordable housing on PF sites. And therefore, to support the development of affordable and attainable housing, we are working on general plan and zoning amendments to achieve two objectives. One is to allow 100% affordable housing as a primary use on public facility sites within the urban services line. The density would be up to urban high, which is up to 17.4 units per acre. All these units would be required to be affordable to lower income households, which is currently defined as 50 to 80% of the area median income. The updated regulations would also allow rental housing for school employees as a primary use on PF sites that are owned by a public or private school in the unincorporated area of the county. Since school employed households often have incomes that are slightly above what is considered moderate, yet still are unable to often afford to live in the county or to rent in the county, these units would not be required to be deed restricted as affordable units. The density for these units would also be up to urban high. The actual density that would be approved would be based upon ensuring and reviewing the carrying capacity of each site. An application would be reviewed to ensure that appropriate infrastructure is provided, which includes adequate water, sewage disposal, roads, and fire protection. And the existing environmental protection regulations, which include protection for riparian corridors, sensitive habitats, controlling erosion, would also apply. So briefly, just provide an overview of the intent for the farm worker housing, which is to facilitate the development of farm worker housing while protecting farmland. And there will be two objectives for these regulations. One is to clarify that projects with up to 12 units of farm worker housing or 36 beds would be allowed as a by right use under state law. And the second is to develop criteria for housing projects with more than 12 units or 36 beds to facilitate the development of farm worker housing on these sites while protecting agricultural land. And one of the things that Julie has been working on is working with the local working group on developing appropriate criteria and identifying the criteria that would make a good site for farm worker housing. And did you want to say a few words, Julie?
Sure. Your commission has been keeping up to date on the farm worker housing needs assessment that was done. It was completed a year ago. And so as you all know, and I'm sure many members of the public know, there is really a crisis in the shortage of housing for agricultural workers with impacts on the community and on the industry. So we've been working with the Farm Bureau, the Land Trust, City of Watsonville, to try to come up with strategies to identify sites. We had been very much hoping that we would have a local source of funds that would really allow for the creation of multifamily, deed restricted, affordable farm worker housing. And with the defeat of Measure H, we do not have that local source of funds now. However, we are continuing to work on identifying sites, appropriate criteria. There is some funding opportunities that are coming down the pike with the state funding, looking for a way to find local dollars that will allow the leverage needed to create those units. Continues to be a challenge, but we are still working on it. And I'll be keeping you up to date on that as we move along. It really is very exciting to be working with this group of people in partnership to meet this need.
Our next steps for the affordable housing initiatives, we anticipate the housing on PF sites and the permanent room housing packages being considered by approval by the board in the spring of this year following the Planning Commission review. And these would then be forwarded on to the Coastal Commission for their review and approval. And the earlier near-term initiatives that were approved by the board, including the density bonus and our combining district amendments, are expected to be considered by the Coastal Commission in March and will go into effect after the final approval by the Coastal Commission. And the farm worker housing proposal, the details of that will be brought to your commission later this spring.
So not just that, the word for the public on that, we do have a sign-in sheet that should be somewhere around the end of the table there. If you would like to receive updates as we learn of hearing dates on these items, we'll email that out to you if you give us your email on that sheet there.
So this is contact information for Daisy and myself, and all of us are available for questions as well.
Okay. Take commissioner questions on those two items.
Yes, I have a question.
Dean had his hand up actually
Yeah, go ahead.
earlier, so go ahead.
You know, as what I remember from the farm worker housing study, there were very few transient farm workers in the county, and mostly either family, permanent residents, and of course with children and needs for schools and grocery stores and usual. So I don't quite understand why farm worker housing is any different than housing for anyone else.
Sure. One of the things is having it developed and built as affordable farm worker housing. You're right that the largest, it isn't the only, but there is a large need for permanent housing and usually for families, which is why it's very important to consider the siting of these projects. They should be either in or, adjacent or nearly adjacent to the city. Certainly, in order to compete for funding, they need to be within a half mile of certain services and schools and so forth. So yeah, you're definitely right, and that's something that we take into account. I would say that it is different in that building the housing specifically for agricultural workers and their families reserves it for that group. And so that's really a large reason for the purpose of it. And we would never consider proposing any multifamily rental housing that was, outside of urban services lines if it wasn't specifically targeting farm worker housing.
That was exactly my question, whether this would be for single men who work in the fields, or were you addressing families?
Sure, and so, what Annie was discussing is the ordinance update, which is really, taking into state law, into our ordinance, and addressing our local needs by doing that. Some of that housing may very well be built, specifically for single workers whose families are not with them. We do still have that need. We have a ratio, but I'm sorry, I can't recall right at the moment. But I know when I talk to farmers, whenever I talk to farmers, they'll talk about, well, my permanent staff we pretty much have accommodated, but every year we have this surge and we'd love to be able to find a way to provide housing for that group. So we really expect, as we develop and hone a plan for farm worker housing, to address all three things. And by three things, I mean multifamily, family projects, the single, not with families, that is, but are longer term, and then, temporary housing.
And the state law also does, especially for up to 12 units, does say that the local jurisdictions need to provide all those types of housing, temporary and, opportunity for temporary single, facilities like dorm style with beds. So we're required to be able to provide all those as well.
And maybe just to clarify, the state law, when they said that there's some layers to it, but the first thing that we need to comply with is to permit when a farm owner requests to build, and particularly some of these more seasonal, single bed type facilities for single workers. Most likely those would probably not be the types of projects we would be subsidizing or actively driving, but the farmer may request a permit for that, and so we need to request or issue that permit if it falls within these state guidelines. The other kind of level of county participation is probably more likely on the family housing side, where we would be actively helping to plan, fund a project with some of these state sources that are specifically for farm worker housing. So that, I think, is kind of more along the lines of what Julie was talking about.
Exactly.
Right.
And my question goes more towards that point. It seems to me that the farmer, if I'm a farmer and I want to hire labor, I control their housing, I control them. In some of these family projects where it's longer term, more like indentured servitude. I think it'd be better some of those programs to have separate parcels not owned by farmers necessarily and controlled as landlords by the single farmer for their own benefit. If it's short-term bunk housing or whatever for migrant workers, I think that obviously is I got to get people in, I got to house them, I got to get them to work, and then they're going to go. They're going to go wherever they go next. But that could be more, more appropriate for the farmer to have that in their control as opposed to this long-term, low-income family housing where you only can work for me now because I'm the landlord.
And the affordable multifamily farm worker projects are not run by farmers. They're built generally by organizations like Eden, Mid-Penn Housing, and they are managed. The only difference between a farm worker project and rental project and one that is for general low-income families is that there's a requirement that a percentage of the income of the household comes from agricultural work. Otherwise, they're managed, except for how they're built and so forth, but they look very, very similar to any other rental project.
Should also
And it's not
I should also clarify that this part of the reason for the state law too is that their health and safety standards, because the housing needs to be safe and sanitary, and we've all seen like horrible dilapidated shacks that farmers are living in. So for all of the types, for both the up to 12 units, a little more, there are standards that ensure it's safe and sanitary housing.
Questions over on this side of the commission on this topic? I had a question about the multifamily housing in the public facility zone. Do school districts have any independent ability to build housing on their own sites because they're also a government agency?
The state law says that school districts for classroom facilities, they're not sort of subject to local regulations, but in terms of housing, that's sort of beyond the classroom facilities, so then they are subject to local. Yeah, so that's why we're proposing to amend it so that they would be allowed to build housing on their sites.
If they build residential on their sites, are they also subject to the state architect? If they build
I'm
school
not sure.
facilities. I don't know, is that like an extra layer?
It may be.
The state architect has jurisdiction over education buildings.
It is a different approval process.
Okay.
Definitely.
Okay.
And we've got a number, this is a very hot topic right now, so we'll be talking about it more.
Okay. But they can't be building on currently active education sites, right?
They can
Well,
if there's room.
If
It's
there's
just
room.
that they're
Okay.
subject to our land use and zoning
Right.
in terms of any residential that they
Residential,
might put
yeah.
on it.
Right.
Did you have
And that's part of the challenge is,
Right.
so there's a number of complexities and also who would build it and manage it and so forth.
Yeah, and then there would be subject to our local regulations, which require that it be ancillary to the school use, and then it's also the density is very limited, so they wouldn't, generally they wouldn't be able to build very many units that would make it feasible for them to build the housing.
you have a follow-up question?
Yes, so actually two as a result of your last comment. You know, and Jane can speak to this, you need a certain density for economies.
Right, right.
So, so you can't artificially restrict the densities, you know. Anyway, that's.
I think our intent is to do exactly the opposite.
Right.
Is
Right
that
now,
we are
right now it
currently-
is restricted.
Right, currently they are extremely low densities and so low that a project would not be feasible. And so looking for a path to consider something else is what we're trying to do.
Right, so-
To address that issue.
Right, so yeah, we'd be putting it at our highest density we have basically for housing, so that's the intent.
No, I just have a question. It seems like there was some state enabling legislation in the last year or so.
There was a bill that was passed. It didn't make huge changes in this regard. It made more on the financing end for the schools that are pursuing this option. It wasn't specifically on the local land use policy side of it.
Thank you.
Unless there are any other questions from the commission, I'll open it up to members of the public, and we have 3 minutes each. Jane, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I have a question before I start my timing. I have comments on all three. Do you want me to stop at each one? Because I have about 6 or 7 comments. Do you want me to stop at each one so this can be responded to, or do you want them all together?
I would recommend you make all your comments in one.
Okay, well, take notes. I'm going to go backwards. So the farm worker, I've been involved with the housing needs assessment. We support this. There have been some changes in farm worker housing now can be qualified as a farm worker housing project. It's only 50%, so I don't know how you're looking at that. In regard to multifamily for public use, I've had the opportunity to look at more than one district's salaries. Most of them do fall with 80% or less. For a family of 4 in Santa Cruz County, that would be $132,000 is 120% at moderate. So I would ask that you might consider a limit of a certain percentage of the units above 80%, which is low or above moderate. And I think K through 12 and the junior college would all probably, the vast majority of the salaries would be below. In regard to the first topic, permanent room housing combining district, I'm wondering how this affects if someone was to come in after the fact and then raise a property and build multifamily, if it has changed the use or what it's looked at. I'm concerned that you can rent out short-term for 3 months and long-term for 9 months, because that translates to me to students, and many students don't have an affordable need. So it's not really affordable by design in that respect. I wonder if you've done a survey of the current rents and see how they do fit in, because you could be charging a lot of money to 2 students in one of these projects, and it's not really affordable for our residents, and our residents can't compete. And then I wonder about next steps of enforcement after passage of this, if these projects, other projects don't participate and are doing permanent housing. And finally, I'm wondering if you want to consider grandfathering in short-term use under the current owner, not to exceed the current use. If you follow that comment.
Yes. Okay, so what I'd like to do, and I imagine there are going to be a lot of questions that folks would like to get answered, and there are going to be more comments that people have time to make today. So what I'd like to do is encourage people who didn't get a chance to ask their questions or make their comments in full today to contact the members of the staff. That's why their contact information is up there, and they can get your questions answered in due time. And then also, if you captured the questions of the folks who are here today and you signed in, then we can ask the staff to get those questions answered for you in a more complete way than maybe we have time for it today.
Can I ask that people identify where they're from, since I'm new? I don't always know.
I'm Jane Barr, and I'm with Eden Housing. I'm sorry about that.
Thanks, Jane. I appreciate it. Anyone else like to address us? Becky?
Yeah, I'd like to have 3 minutes and give it to Becky Steinbruner, please.
Oh, that's all right. Well, thank you. My name is Becky Steinbruner. I'm a resident of Aptos, and I'm interested in this problem and finding solutions, and I've been working with a number of people on it too. I'm going to start with the permanent housing. I would like to see your commission make a recommendation that there be a grandfather or a grace period for owners who were maybe not contacted, or maybe who opted not to follow up on initial contact because it was so uncertain, and of a basic mistrust of the county government to enter into any type of agreements. So So I would like to see there be a grace period for those who were not contacted or maybe who would like to reconsider, now that things are a little more concrete, to be given a chance. So that's what I would like to see, because 77 units is really not much. And I'd like to see more come in through this use and not restricted to old buildings. Just because something is old, that doesn't mean that it's struggling. Some of the newer ones may be too. So I would like to see, again, an extension to those owners and operators. I had a question on the map about the overlay lines. I noticed the area mapped out for, in particular, the Bayview Hotel was a very large area, not just the building itself. So I'm curious about that line and what that really means. Does that mean future buildings within that zone would also be included in this and could be considered? I want to also point out that the East Street units are in the coastal zone. I think I can now move on to, and I wanted to just make one point that I think we should also make a restriction that no Airbnb should be able to be used for these things as a subcontractor for any people who would use these types of arrangements. The farm worker housing, I have some concern because I am an agricultural worker myself, and I see that many of the agricultural jobs are going away because of mechanization. I really want to take to heart Mr. Lundholm's comment that there are very few transitory workers, and those who are here are with families and need to be closer to schools and services. So to put them out in the farms is maybe, without the infrastructure or transportation easily available, is creating problems for them rather than a hand up. And I would like to see, instead of permanently built structures, a consideration of mobile homes that would give more flexibility for the use of the land and really and truly preserve the agricultural use and its extended use into the future, with a possible increased mechanization or a change in the land use from intensive agriculture. And I also,
3 minutes, by the way.
Can I have 1 more minute?
If you can wrap it up quickly. Thank you.
Can he?
We don't
You don't allow that. Okay, this is why I protested. So I just want to say that I think we're all thinking about strawberries and broccoli. We've also got to consider the cannabis industry and how this would apply to them. I'm concerned that there is work to make projects with greater than 12 units without any, outside of the urban services line, and to contradict the recent enhanced density bonus that were put through did not restrict it, to my understanding, within the urban services line. So my concern is that these new enhanced density bonus accoutrements could be extended to farm housing, and that will indeed put strain on our agricultural land preservation, and that worries me.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Does anyone else want to address the commission?
The questions I have are,
Okay.
my name is Rosemary DeMere, I'm a realtor. Regarding the legal non-conforming scenario that most of these properties have, I've had some owners ask me, will they become legal conforming? And I said, I don't know, unless they would change the designation of the zoning itself. It's not really possible, because zoning is sort of set in stone when you're trying to calculate what something is. So that's a question that I have. And the other question is, you refer to opportunity sites, but there's the opportunity zones, which are the federally designated particular ones. Those are not the same, clearly. I wonder if there might be confusion with that. I would call attention to the fact that they need not be the same as opportunity zones, because there's only 2 in Santa Cruz County that are under that opportunity zone designation. Let's see, what else can I ask you? I'll probably think of it when I leave. So I'll send you an email. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other folks would like to address the commission? Tim?
Tim Willoughby speaking for Affordable Housing Now. Normally, when we're here, we're pushing only for projects and units that are 100% affordable housing, deed restricted. This is a little bit of an exception for us, but we support all three of these ideas. The two things that Jane brought up are ideas that are questions that we would also ask. One was the vacation rental part of it. It seems to us that either they should not be vacation rentals or that they should be phased out if you have to get somebody to come in. And then on the school projects, that the income restrictions, that while most beginning teachers would qualify, teachers that have been there for a long time have a fairly much higher income, and we don't think that that kind of housing should be made available to them, and I don't know if that can be restricted. But just real quickly, we have a teacher shortage. It's obvious. We need housing for teachers, and especially because beginning teachers make so little money, they don't want to come here, so we do need that. Farm, you might want to know that the change in some of the farm worker laws, they did get a minimum wage now, but it's still, those are still our lowest paid workers. However, the other thing that changed is it used to be that they had to move every 6 months or 4 months, and that we, by law, we made them migratory, but that no longer applies, so they can stay longer. So as Dean pointed out, they should be, we need to look at units that fit that need. And then on the final one, just to say, I can speak from personal experience, because before I moved here in the Eastern Sierra, I and 4 other property owners owned old lodges that were built in the 50s. They were 10 miles from Mammoth Lakes, which has a horrible housing shortage and very high rents. And these were older units and small units, 500 square feet. And the 4 different lodges now provide the lowest rent in even lower than deed restricted qualified income housing. They have the lowest rent in the area. So it's a worthwhile thing to do. And so I commend the idea.
Thank you. And okay, one question. I just want to see, is there anyone else from the public who wants to make a comment or ask questions? Okay. So,
I remembered my thing.
and I remembered you had a minute and a half left, so.
Oh, okay, good. The question I had is I think sometimes what we do is attempt to do something that would be expeditious, if you will, to take the existing homes, our existing housing, like visitor accommodation, which then becomes housing in a fashion. But what are we trying to do when we attempt construction of new? And in the past, I've been kind of like frustrated when we have the RHNA, the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, that comes before us, and then we run around and just find all the housing that's already there and count that, and it doesn't create new housing. Where's the new stuff? Where are we going to do that, and how are we going to do that? And what's our creative solution to that? I remember being on a committee called Creative Solution 30 years ago, and God, we had a lot of great ideas, and boy, none of them happened. So maybe we could go back and dig those ideas up and try to see if we can implement them. But we need new something. Because I was at 6 hours at the city of Santa Cruz over the rent control issue, and it's all over supply. Supply of housing isn't there. That's why there's this giant battle. And they reinstituted very similar to the Just Cause thing. So that won't create housing. It doesn't make housing happen. It stifles it. And I'm really scared. So.
Thank you. If there aren't any other comments or questions from members of the public, I'll close the public comment period and bring it back to the commission. And Kent?
Yes. First of all, I sense that we have staff moving in the right direction of flexibility here, and I want to say, way to go. It's like good baseball most of the time. You don't hit a home run on the first pitch. Get to first or second base, and then we'll see where we get next. I see this business of recognizing what has happened to existing buildings as implicitly a recognition that our planning process has not been nimble and needs to be more nimble. as time and conditions evolve. And I think it's a recognition that we can do it without, selling the farm to to high-rise construction. And then my last comment is this business of 90 days of short-term rental a way of sort of sweetening things with the coastals? Do we have to get past? No?
Most of these, I think, are not in the coastal zone, is that correct?
There's 2 properties in the coastal zone.
Were they opting into that?
Yeah, and I was thinking it might be somewhat of a sweetener because they do care so much about visitor serving.
It was more about the individual property owners needing some more flexibility to make sure that they weren't losing income.
And I like it that we're taking some account of the commercial realities for the property owners, again, without selling out. Thanks.
Any other commission comments?
I'd like to encourage a little bit more openness to like old motels and such that are maybe underutilized or failing and not being used because they're older or whatever. Maybe getting them rehabbed and actually having occupancy in all of them instead of, a couple of them being used if they're not doing so well. Encouraging those, even though they're existing motels or whatever, that maybe be more open to them to become a part of this program.
And I'd also like to say that I agree with Commissioner about the 90 days. Having been in that business, there are some times when we need to allow the person to run it economically and provide permanent housing at the same time. So I like the 90 days, just personally.
But the comment about catering to students with 90-day rentals is very cogent, very cogent comment.
Dean, do you have
Oh, just to this thought about we need more housing. And I think there's a real need for more divergent thinking. I don't see enough of it here. And one example that comes to my mind is the city of Minneapolis, who recently decided that they could put multi-family units in single-family zones, essentially no more single-family zones. And I don't hear ideas like that in the county of Santa Cruz very often.
If there aren't any other comments, I would like to just ask a follow-up question, and that is, can you remind us all of the rules around short-term rental housing, or short-term rental of ADUs, and whether that's an allowed use
It
or
is
not?
not an allowed
It is
use.
not an allowed use, right. So the reason I ask the question is because I'm struggling with this notion of supporting vacation rentals in these properties because of the express objective to provide affordable housing. I understood the arguments that would have allowed vacation rental use in ADUs in order to facilitate some flexibility on personal residential property for people who didn't want to rent their ADUs out full-time, wanted to have it available for family members who would come and visit, but also wanted to take advantage of some of the income potential that's inherent in an ADU, especially in this market where it's very difficult for people to buy housing. So I understood that part of it, even if we eventually didn't agree to allow it. But I'm having trouble, and I'm happy to be challenged by my fellow commissioners or the staff on this, but I'm having trouble sitting with, unless it's already an established use on a property, allowing properties to come into this program and then allowing them to set up a new use of vacation rental as a carrot, sort of, to get them to bring some of the other units online as residential units. I think I understand the reasoning, but for me it doesn't line up with the stated objective of providing those units as affordable by design. If we had affordability requirements that we were layering into this, I might feel a little bit differently about it, but, I mean, my initial reaction is that we shouldn't allow that use on these
Yeah,
properties.
it's a good point what you say about depending on what the by right use is on the property. So some of these properties are zoned for visitor accommodation, or they're zoned commercial, and visitor accommodation is a by right use for their commercial zoning that they have. So for those properties, short-term rental use is already allowed by right in the underlying zoning, so that we wouldn't be changing that.
This is
The
just
question
an overlay.
the question comes up for maybe the residentially zoned properties. Could they obtain, for instance, vacation rental permits for their properties? Something to think about.
I think if I understood from you correctly, the two that do want to preserve a couple of the units or whatever it is as short-term rentals is because they're already using
Those
those
two
units
are
that
already
way.
allowed.
That's
So
right.
we're not really contemplating converting ones that are currently being used as long-term rentals to a short-term rental. It's just that we want to allow.
We would grandfather that use.
Well, it's not as strict as grandfather, but just allow them to continue it, because again, you've got to think about that owner's motivation. If we were going to be really strict about it and they're already in visitors serving or commercial, they might just opt not to opt in, and then we've got 0 new permanent units. So it's a balancing act on that motivation factor with individual property owners is really what it is.
Yeah, I totally understand that, and I think that makes sense where there's already that established use going on. I think where you have empty sites where people are not renting them as short-term, and then we're allowing them to come online as residential units, permanent room housing, and then to let them have a mechanism for doing short-term rentals, to my mind, doesn't fit the objective. And I just one other comment I would make is that the concern I have is that if we're taking units offline for 90 days potentially at a time, that's not stable housing for people. If people were able to use them for 9 months and they get them at an affordable by design rate potentially, that's great. But then if those units are then turned over, then we're destabilizing someone's housing. Unless what you're saying is they would signify specific units that would remain available, but then they sit there dark.
Not necessarily, because they may have enough demand to use those actively year-round.
But essentially for 9 months out of the year, they're not.
No, they could use, let's say they have 15 units in the property, and they have enough demand based on past practice to have, let's say, 2 or 3 of them set aside for essentially like motel-type use, and it's mostly year-round. We would allow them, if I understand correctly how you guys have drafted this, to signify that those 2 or 3 units would be used on an ongoing basis as visitors serving. Is that a correct summary?
Yeah, well, see, I read it to say units rented short-term for more than 90 days or not.
So PRH units would be long-term rental units, but each PRH unit, the way we have the code drafted currently, would have the opportunity to do short-term rental up to 90 days per year. A PRH property, like a PRH zoned property, could also have exclusively short-term rentals on the property. Now, it's a really interesting question you raised, though, about are we creating a new opportunity for short-term rentals where we're not? Those are currently allowed with the underlying code. And I don't think that's actually what we had intended. It's more that most of these properties are already by right allowed to do short-term rentals based on their zoning. But I would like to take a look at the code and just make sure that that is properly baked in.
Yeah, I could see like if the convalescent hospital site was converting where they didn't have that initial use, something like that, then,
So we can look at that.
Okay.
Come up with something.
Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, and Julie, I'm sorry, I didn't call on you.
No, that's okay. I just was going to kind of remind us all that a lot of the intent here is to provide a path to recognize that these conversions have already happened, and we really want them to be brought up to a higher standard, and give an opportunity to make that happen. So it's a housing quality issue as well as a, housing access.
Housing creation.
Well,
Also housing.
it's not housing creation, that's the.
Well, it is, if
Well-
it's taking, it is officially, it's recognizing something that may be, what it would be recognized now as a VA site, visitor accommodation site, and it is recognizing it as a residential site.
Yeah.
Just one thing, it's one thing if we have the intention not to increase it, but it's another if people figure out how to do it with the way it's written. So I think it's, do you understand what I'm saying? So in other words, you intend for people to have set aside some and not add anymore, but if there's a way to wiggle around it, that's what I would, that in a way is what I hear you say. Do you understand what I'm saying? Am I
Well,
saying
we
this
do
clearly?
have density requirements baked into the code, so you'd only be able to add new units if it was allowed by the underlying density of the site.
Designations.
Okay.
I think what I was getting at was that where there are facilities currently now, that short-term vacation rentals isn't an established use.
Right.
I'm not probably using the right
Right.
language, but where that's not currently ongoing, like at a former
Yes.
motel property versus a former nursing care facility, it doesn't seem to me to line up with the objectives of creating additional affordable units, affordable by design, to then now proactively allow someone to take that use. So I heard you say you're going to take
We'll
that
look
into
at that
consideration.
and see if we can
Okay.
figure out what's.
Yeah, and I agree with you, that's not the intent
Yeah.
of the code, so I'll look at the draft code and make sure that's spelled out.
Okay.
No, that's fine.
Okay.
I agree.
So you're not looking for a motion in terms of supporting this today, are you? It just says to take comments and provide them, take comments from the public and the commission, provide those back to you, or are you seeking some level of motion of
You
support
do not
today?
need to do a motion, we were
Okay.
just looking for input from you all and
Okay.
questions.
Thank you. Okay, well then unless the commission has anything else to add, we'll move on to the next item and thank members of the public for their participation in that. So this is the housing activities update, which is an oral presentation.
Yes, that would be me.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks for your work.
Yes, and welcome, Laura. Thanks to have you on the commission. I'm going to focus in the time that we have really around funding and projects. There is actually a fair amount of going on with funding, right? We are very busy with funding right now. Two in particular, in our role as the lead agency for our local continuum of care, there's significant funding coming down as through a couple of state-funded programs called HEAP, the Homeless Emergency Assistance Program, and CASH, which is the California, it's basically the takeoff of the Emergency Solutions Grant. So there, you'll see some action in front of the board. We collaborate with the CAO's office, where the homeless services coordinator is now, and there's a general increasing level of collaboration going on there. But because we're the COC, we're the lead for HEAP, which is just under $10 million coming to our COC as a block grant. The board will be taking action on it on the 29th of January, and there's just 2 years to spend that money. So it's a very big deal. It needs to move very quickly. Permanent supportive housing projects are eligible. It's very difficult though because they have to be online by June of 2021. So we're most likely seeing it in other kinds of projects. So that's going on. We also are collaborating with the Health Services Agency on the No Place Like Home money. And that is $20 billion in the next few years that is available. The majority of that money is meant to produce new housing. And it's funding that we need very badly. It's modeled closely after the Mental Health Services Act housing program. It has some important differences. One of them is that we can get more units per project. As you know, it's very hard to have suitable sites online. And we're really, I am optimistic about doing that. We are submitting a project under round one And it's really the health department. We're collaborating with them on that to make sure that projects get included. And it's moving along. So the round one application is for Jesse Street. It's in the city of Santa Cruz. Mid-Penn Housing has owned it since the late 90s. And getting No Place Like Home funding for it would be really exciting. We will be encouraging all multifamily affordable projects to consider including these units in them. So that's busy. The housing section is also working with the health department on their non-competitive allocation, which you'll be hearing more about because we're anticipating running it as a small loan program to get some shared housing available to people who are, the target population for No Place Like Home, which is people with serious mental illness who have a history of homelessness and chronic homelessness. So those were very, very busy with those. And also you all heard about CDBG. I just thought I would do a quick update on that. We'll be going to the board this coming Tuesday, recommending projects that have come in through that. So we always like to see commissioners at board meetings when possible. So those will be coming forward. That's exciting to kind of see a little bit of some money flowing. Just to touch base on some projects, keeping you up to date. The Habitat project on Harper Street will be going to the board on I was thinking it was the 12th.
29th.
It's the 29th of January. So that's another one that I know your commission has followed for a long time.
Is it at 11 units?
Yes.
It is at 11 units, that's right. And so it'll be both, the board will be hearing the development proposal, the environmental review, and on the same agenda, we're planning on taking the affordable housing property disposition agreement. At least that's the plan right now. There's a slight chance it'll slip to February 12th, but we're trying to get it all in. So that's another one that's exciting. So the 17th and Capitola project is another one that you've heard. That's a Mid-Penn project, 56 units of affordable rental housing. It includes a dental clinic that D'Antis is providing, and also the East Cliff Family Health Center is looking to move there. That project is moving along. It has submitted for its development approvals. I'm not going to commit to a time frame on approval, but we'll definitely be keeping you up to date as we go along with that. That project has been the subject of a whole lot of community meetings that Commissioner Lundholm has participated in a lot of those, I think all of them. So and I guess you've been at quite a few of those meetings too, yeah. So that's another really exciting project. Otherwise, we talked about farm worker housing a little bit. Continues to be a need. We have a couple of projects that let me just give you a teaser. One of the sites has been listed for sale at the Atkinson site. So that's one that's it's within the urban services line. It's already been zoned at 20. It's in one of our combining district sites.
Where is that?
It's just outside of Watsonville, on Atkinson Lane. It's called Atkinson. It's actually a much bigger area than that, but somehow or other that's the moniker it landed. So, we are a little bit hopeful that we'll see a project coming forward there. And we're involved in conversations about other farm worker housing sites that would be in that general area. So we'll talk to you more about that. And that's all I have for now, unless you have questions. Yes?
The Kaiser Hospital medical facility, as I understand, is on the 9 Lumber housing site.
Yes.
What is going to happen with the new guess, a new location for those units.
Yes. So for those of you who don't know, the Nye lumber, we call it Nye Protiva, is one of our combining sites that it is under consideration for as a Kaiser site, medical office building. And if it moves forward, it does have to relocate the entitlement of those, of 102 units of housing. And so that's part of the discussion there, and it's very much part of the discussion. Peter Detlefs from Economic Development just left, but we've been involved in talking about where would that site be. Kaiser has been working with local land use consultants to consider various sites and evaluate them. So we'll be keeping you posted.
Thank you. Yes. Would there be any housing with the medical facility?
Not on that site.
No.
They need a lot of space.
Thank you.
You bet.
Final item on the agenda is written correspondence, none received. So I believe we're ready to adjourn. And the next meeting, we got out a little bit out of order because of the January travel time. But next meeting is
March 6th.
March 6th. Thank you.
Is the public allowed to comment at all on the director's report?
No, but you're more than welcome to stay after and speak with anybody about it. But we don't have this agendized public comment for that. So we're done.
Should all items on the agenda be open to public comment? That's usually how it works.
No, that's not typically how we've done it. We have public comments, oral communications at the top of the agenda, and then can comment on business items.
I'm just curious that no mention was made of the Measure G's sales tax money that is also earmarked for housing. So I just wanted to point that out to you.
All right, we're adjourned. Thank you very much. We'll see you in March.